Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name's Vicky, and I'm from the People's Food and Farming Alliance. And tonight we have the second part of our glyphosate event, where we will be discussing the complex issues associated with glyphosate usage. We've got a really, really good lineup of speakers, some that you would have seen from if you attended the first one, and then we've got some new ones for you. So really, really good lineup of speakers. And I'm actually going to first start by introducing you to Mark, the bowler hat farmer, who you might be able to spot because he has got the hat. We decided actually very last minute that we should have all worn hats, but we didn't. We messed up on that one. So I'm going to allow Mark to introduce himself, but he is going to help you. He's going to discuss the issue of yields and such like, because many farmers believe that we wouldn't be able to feed the country if we didn't use glyphosate. So over to you, Mark.
Evening, everybody. Okay, can I backtrack first from the glyphosate issue? So I'm quite old now in my life and was trained in agriculture and horticulture at 16 to 18. So that's about coming up for 40 years ago now. And we were trained that you will not grow anything in the UK without glyphosate and nitrogen. Obviously, nature managed before we got there and before Big Pharma got involved, so we can only assume that that isn't the case. So, little bit of history on glyphosate and where it originates from, just to give people who are on tonight an idea of, from my personal opinion on this, of just how dangerous this stuff is. So I first got a baptism of fire on this as a young farmer when we were introduced to go spraying and realised just how dangerous this stuff is when you need ventilation suits and everything else. But it becomes quite apparent as you work forward through the industry that there is a lot of misconception that's been put upon the farmers over the years. So history of glyphosate obviously starts as Agent Orange. It's designed for the Vietnam War. It is proven that it works fantastically to kill vegetation, but unfortunately it kills all vegetation. So you then can't use it without adapting the seed. So obviously that very clever company called Monsanto took a little bit of time back in the 80s to GMO all the food grain, what it was about, and made it so that it was resistant to the glyphosate. So you could spray a field what had this grain in it and it wouldn't kill the crop. So from the farmers, it's absolute heaven, because what's happening is you've got the situation where the farmers are needing less staff because now they don't have to hoe. We're in a situation that they're playing on nitrogen, so they're getting a higher crop retention, and they're winning. Monsanto are having a double bubble because they're selling them the seed now, which will only work with their glyphosate, and they're selling them the glyphosate that they can only use with their seed. So they've got an absolutely brilliant situation set up. Now, I spoke to some friends today because from my side and how I farm, I'm on a very small scale. I don't use glyphosate in any way, shape or form. However, what I will say is I do believe there's a place for it as it presently stands in agriculture. That's because agriculture needs to change, and it needs to change. And Catherine always talks about this. This is the transition period which we need to go through. And that is a case of reducing the amount of seed from weeds that grows. So you constantly keep on top of the weeds over 1, 2, 3, 5 years, so that seed doesn't get into the ground to grow to start with. Then you don't need the glyphosate. So that's where we need to get to. But I inquired with a few friends today around some of the farms and said, you know, we obviously use glyphosate and use nitrogen. where do you see that as on a point of importance? Now, these are commercial farmers. So these are people that are of the understanding that they cannot farm at all without those products. So I got told that, well, we would produce 75% less food if we didn't have those two chemicals. I got told by another one, well, you know, yields up by at least 40% if we use them. What I do see is you need a lot less staff on a farm because, you know, if you go back to when my granddad had the farm, you know, they would spend probably a month hoeing sugar beet over the winter just to get the weeds out. And there would be teams and teams and teams of men working up and down the field all day long for weeks on end. Now, 20 minutes, the whole field sprayed and they don't have to worry about it again. That's lovely, but where is that chemical going? Because while I've been on my journey of glyphosate over the last few years, I, you know, came across, and I don't know, and I apologise now for any of the other speakers if anyone's going to talk about this side, but one of the things I found out was about gluten and about how, because I'm allergic to gluten, so I believed. So I was always told, no, you know, you've got to get gluten-free bread, la, 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 la. When I actually went through all the tests, it was the glyphosate plus that I was allergic to. So, and the reason I say plus is because the plus is what the glyphosate does to the grain. So it changes the protein in the grain, and it's the change in the protein that my body can't deal with. So I thought I was allergic to the gluten, but it's actually the protein change because of the glyphosate. So if I have natural organic grain, I can eat bread. Interesting. So I think from that, so there's a lot on there that people need to understand from why farmers use it is because it saves them time and money. Do they need to use it? Yes, at the moment, how they're presently set up to farm. Because if you go back 50 years and you'd have had a farm where you had a 4-year rota plan, you would have had animals on that field which would have dealt with the weeds. As the weeds come up, the animals would take them off, whether that's pigs, sheep, goats, whatever, they would carve them off at the roots. So they never get the chance to reseed. And that's one of the problems in today's farming, that there is no, it's all monoculture, everything's there, it's all straight on the line, get some weed killer on it, kill everything off, and I mean everything. And what you'll end up with is some soil that you can then set some seed in. If you put some nitrogen on that seed, you'll end up with a crop. And then as the crop grows and the weeds grow, put some more weed killer on it. And this perpetual circle goes on and on and on. I see you've got some questions up there, but I can't access them, Vicky.
Not to worry. You carry on and then I'll ask them at the end.
Okay. So from my side, obviously, glyphosate, as I came to realise at a very early stage, my opinion was that it's carcinogenic, which obviously we know causes cancer. Does it sit within the body? I believe it does, and I believe you get a build-up of layers of this over the time, and that is one of the things what causes the cancer in bodies. If you've got something that you eat a lot of that is high in content of it, then I think there is more chance that's the case. One of the worst crops in the world, in fact, the two worst crops in the world for having high levels of concentration of glyphosate in are almonds, is the biggest one, and soya is the second biggest one. So for almond milk drinking vegans, then I think they may have an issue. And that's because the product or the crop is actually immune to glyphosate. So the glyphosate doesn't work on it. So therefore, to kill the infections and kill the bugs and things and the weeds around it, they need to use 2-3 times as much. So it's a much more densely concentrated a delivery of the poison, as to speak, in each time it's sprayed. So you're then in the position that the saturation of that plant over the course of the year, and obviously almonds, it's a tree, you know, it's something that you are quite happily going to spray year on year on year on year, and the concentration inside the plant gets higher, concentration in you gets higher. And I think that's kind of where we've got to with the whole, we've kind of reached that pinnacle within the farming industry of big pharma playing a place, in my belief. What we now need to do is to step completely back 100 years. We need to get farms back to doing multi-layer farming, where we'll have a 4-year rota and we'll put the lays down. The animals graze the lays, they put the manure down, the manure's turned into the ground. That's then grown on the next year. The natural nitrogen's in the ground, and we can start the system again for another 4 years. That would eradicate a massive requirement for nitrogen. That would put a massive, massive reduction in the amount of chemicals needed on the farm, because they wouldn't be dealing with so many weeds because the animals would have eaten them. I'll give you a classic example of this is when we've got pigs on the farm, they will dig the ground out to 1 foot 18 inches deep, taking out every solitary root and every seed they find. You hardly ever get a weed come up in a pig pen because they eat it and they deal with it. So there's no seed. So that perpetual mill that you're on while you're chasing the seeds every year. And again, I'll give you a classic example of this. One of the biggest mistakes I ever made on our first farm we had was that my partner at the time said to me that we'd got some lovely thistles growing. And she said to me, "Can you not cut them down?" She said, "because they're the ones that come up really nice and tall and you can dry them and they lovely at Christmas. You can spray them silver and red and they're beautiful." I said, "Yeah, okay, no problem, darling." Until I realised that about 27 million seeds had gone all over the vegetable beds that year. And we had to then spend weeks upon weeks hoeing. And in the end, because they were on raised beds, I just fenced off the raised beds and let the pigs in. And the pigs dealt with all the walkways and everything. And that was the only way we could get rid of it without spraying it. So, but when farmers are working on big commercial fields, they're always stuck in that position where they're chasing their backsides over what they've got to get done in the day. They're hell-bent on the belief that they need to put this stuff on because, Monsanto have told them when they sold them the seed, you must spray this 4 times a year. It might only need spraying twice. You could have reduced it by 50% straight away. But that's part of the contract. The contract says you're going to put on X amount of gallons of this a year. So they're stuck in this all the time. And what we need to do is get farmers out of that cycle. And what we need to do is get them onto the new system where, they're working on a 4-year rota plan on the fields, reducing down the amount of chemicals needed and increasing the amount of stuff grown. Because if you take, for instance, grain grows 4 or 5 tonne an acre, let's say, and where I am in East Anglia, we're on very, very heavy clay soil. It's horrible to work with. You put the grain in and the grain can't go anywhere because the ground literally sets around it. But that soil's never been broken. So on the other farm I was on, every year religiously, we put on 6 inches of something to dress the soil over the winter, whether that was manure, whether that was wood chip, whether that was ash, soot, whatever it was, cover the ground, thicken it, leave it on there over the winter, and that would go through the soil, putting everything the soil needed back into it, including natural organic material, and that would break the soil down. And after a few years, you've got beautiful soil that's rich, full of worms, full of natural bacteria, and stuff would grow massive and in abundance. And that's where we need to get farmers to understand they don't need the chemicals. What they actually need is good quality soil. That's me.
So I've got a question on that. How come some farmers like you understand that and then others don't? Is it because is it just the big commercial ones who are not, because they've been indoctrinated from Monsanto?
I think they've been indoctrinated right the way through their schooling. So the colleges, the universities, which the lecturers are paid for by people like Monsanto. So that's into kids at a very young age. That goes up. So as they start then farming, the belief is there. Parents tell them that's the only answer. what I am seeing is that a lot of the people coming through the system now, the younger generation, young farmers side, are seeing the necessity for change, but don't know how that change will come about. So the reason for me, I'm quite happy, you know, when I'm farming a few acres, it's really easy for me to get on with a hoe or get a team of volunteers in with hoes and just say, right, guys, knock yourselves out, get on there and hoe away. Can you do that on a commercial farm? No, you can't. However, what you could do is make sure that soil is better prepared, make sure that soil doesn't have that seed in it, because if you spray thistles off, it doesn't kill them. All it does is kills them down halfway down the root, and in 6 months' time, you've got the thistles back again, or not in that 6 weeks' time, you know, you've got the thistles back again in abundance, probably twice as many as you had before. So, but pigs will dig them out. They'll dig out every ounce of the roots.
So the pigs, which are my favourites, by the way, at my farm,
Mine too.
now I know why. They do everything. I mean, they can literally tear a whole place up, and it looks really destructive, but actually they're doing real good.
Absolutely. I know one night on our farm, on our first farm, we had 2 pigs get out, and they caused absolute. We had a walkway right around. We had a 12-acre site, and there was this huge walkway right around the site. And in one night, they got out and they went 2 foot from the fence around the entire walkway, which was about a mile long, all around the farm, with their noses down, just pushing all the turf out the way. And this was when, you know, you think how hard their noses are, because this is when the ground was rock hard and they couldn't possibly get their noses in.
Yeah, no, they're and they're all very great escape artists, aren't they? Ours are always
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
So I've got a couple of questions. I don't understand the question, so I don't know if it's relevant to you. Someone says, could we please talk about precision breeding bill? Does that mean anything? No?
That's me.
Okay. And there's no talk about the farmers who are getting government money have to plough up local plants and plant seeds they have to buy from the government. Plus, I think we did actually. I think Mark did actually talk about that. If you're talking about the Monsanto seeds and that, and then Jane says, awesome. I spoke to our local organic farmer. They said the local college does not have a module on growing veg.
It's true.
Well, actually, the farm that I'm on, we are next to Plumpton Agricultural College. And we thought it'd be a fantastic idea for some of them to come over and do an apprenticeship with us or whatever. They're not allowed because we're a regenerative farm. And so they're not allowed. And in fact, they were banned from speaking to us at the farm.
Priceless.
I know. So Patricia says, I hear people say we need glyphosate because we have so many more people to feed now. I challenge looking at the enormous amount of food waste. Yeah, good point. If we address that, there would be enough for everyone. Well, and also as a nutritional therapist, I can vouch for the fact that if people actually ate real food, they wouldn't even eat half the food that they're eating now. But they need to be eating the real food, not that stuff from the supermarket.
Not the cardboard.
Yeah, exactly. So she says, yeah, if we address that, there would be enough for everyone, especially if it was wholesome food. Sorry, I didn't read the whole lot. Yeah. So, and then Steve, who posted a link. So maybe you want to let me know what that link's about, Steve. Why don't UK farmers follow the French model?
Which is?
I don't know.
Right,
maybe guys. Steve will tell us.
Yeah. Are you there, Steve?
Yeah. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah, I put the link in to do with that wild justice, to do with a link that just support what Mark was saying about glyphosate showing up in people's blood and food. Yeah, so that's a link to what that wild justice were doing.
Thank you.
To do with the French stuff and Europe stuff. So French have banned glyphosate since 2015. Right. And most of Europe has stopped it. But, and then it's even the French people. They've linked glyphosate with Parkinson's.
Yes.
So they've been paying out compensation for the last 4 years. The French government have.
Wow.
So I'm always yes. So glyphosate has been banned in Europe. Pretty much everyone's on it there. I've got a huge report I've done on it. But I just wonder why in Britain we're so far behind. I don't get it.
Well, Probably, Steve, because there's too many people earning money out of it. And I hate to say that, but that's the reality of it. If someone's earning money out of it, it's difficult to stop it.
Yeah, I get that. Okay. Other thing that I've noticed it's in the French model as well. Well, whole of Europe, America, they have to let the public know. So warning notices.
Yes.
And so if there was more warning notices and more education to the general public, there'd be more of a kind of, outrage around why are we poisoning ourselves as well as the planet. So I'm wondering again, it's in this country, it's good practice. They say, but it's not an illegal requirement. In Europe, in other parts of the world, it's a legal requirement for people that use it to let people, the general public know. So I'm just surprised all the time at how.
And they'll probably blame that, Steve, on Brexit, to be honest, and say, though, because of Brexit, we can't do that. That we're not part of Europe now, so the same rules don't apply.
Oh, but that's the thing they do, though. It's to do with this.
I know that.
Yeah, it's like, what's it? I put the link of it. It's 2009/128/EC. That's the law.
Right.
I'll put it in the chat and people can look it up. But I'm just amazed at it.
I think everybody's amazed at it, Steve. To be honest, I don't think you're alone on that one.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you. Another question here from Sarah Fiona. She says, I read somewhere that glyphosate is linked to autism, which is epidemic proportions. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Dr. Stephanie, who's coming on later, if you get her book, she talks about autism as well. In fact, she talked about it on the last. Oh, you've got a hardback. I've only got a paperback. Yeah, she talked about that on the last one. So if you haven't seen that, then have a look at that. Yeah, and as Patricia says, the EU literally just approved glyphosate for another 10 years. What was that? Back in October, wasn't it? I think. Is organic wheat free of glyphosate? Yes, it is my understanding. But of course, as Mark said earlier, we have to worry about a farmer spraying his field. Is he next to your field? Is the wind carrying the glyphosate?
Absolutely.
I know that in Australia there was an organic farm that ended up having to shut down because they couldn't be considered organic anymore but they hadn't sprayed anything. It was their neighbours that had. So there's that. And then, okay, thanks, Steve. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. That was a fantastic start. So now I'm going to hand you over to my partner in crime, Patricia Bowerman, who is our very own Health Revolution activist, and she is going to talk more to you about her favourite subject, glyphosate.
Well, I'm going to introduce someone I met 6 years ago when I Googled organic flour near me. And a place 15 minutes from me popped up. So I headed round and got some bags of flour. And 2 hours later, I left with my head just absolutely spinning. And that was my introduction to Michael Story, who it's my pleasure to introduce. Michael started the Gift of Bread, and that was a means of sharing a method of making traditional sourdough bread that was safe for people with gluten issues, as well as most celiacs, and the rest of us as well. Michael's been celiac since childhood, which he can fill us in on. But being the type of person who seems to enjoy finding problems to solve, Michael devoted his efforts to finding a way to tackle gluten issues. And the result is a bread made from stone ground whole grain wheat that hasn't been sprayed with glyphosate. And it's loaded with vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and the gluten is modified. So Mark will be interested in this. It's absolutely gorgeous. And he teaches classes using flour made from whole grain, which is not sprayed, of course. So you are in for a real treat, a bit of history, a bit of science, a bit of food. So over to you, Michael.
Okay. First thing is, I I'm not seeing myself on the screen yet. So how do we rectify that? Can you see me?
Yes, we can see you, Michael. Thank you.
Okay. And I haven't got a clear picture of me, but I presume I'm in the picture. My head's not chopped off and everything. Okay.
You look fantastic.
And you can hear me okay?
We certainly can.
This is actually my first time on a Zoom business, other than a couple of little quick trials with Patricia. All right. So I started, say, let's go back 30 years, not right back to my childhood. And I was in America with no medical insurance. And I'm starting to lose weight like you wouldn't believe, 5 pounds a week, constant, nonstop. And I was right down to 8 stone before we managed to find out what it was. And it was gluten intolerance. And I was a fully diagnosed celiac. So I've been gluten-free for the last 30 years. I haven't eaten bread for that period of time. It got to the stage where I was getting desperate for a pizza. And gluten-free pizzas are just really not worth eating whatsoever, not only just because of their taste and everything, but there's so many additives that go into these gluten-free products. I was determined to find out how to make a really good gluten-free pizza. And in my research, I came across a document that stated that if bread was made for 48 hours under the influence of a sourdough starter, a genuine sourdough starter, minimum of 48 hours, then it was, quote, this academic paper, non-toxic to celiac disease patients. Now that sort of makes the proverbial eyes pop out. Anyhow, I plucked up courage, because if I do have gluten, it's a real mess. I'm on the floor, I'm almost unconscious, and it's quite a thing. So I plucked up courage, had a little 1/4 inch square, and had no reaction within 2 hours, which is the normal time it takes for me. So 2 hours, I had a slightly bigger piece, and then later that evening, I scoffed the whole loaf. And for the last 6 years, I can eat absolutely as much bread as I like. But what we did with this bread now that wasn't affecting me was I was just asking neighbors in the street how they responded to bread, because if you go and do a little bit of research, 40% of the population are now gluten intolerant to some degree or another, which who was it? Sorry. Earlier on. Yeah, Mark, sorry. Mark made an interesting comment that he was allergic to gluten. It's not gluten that is the problem. It's the gliadin protein within gluten that causes the issues. And it's got quite far-ranging things. But anyhow, so I started handing out loaves of bread to people in the street and who don't normally eat bread for one reason or other. They get bloated, they get headaches, they get skin rashes, aches in their joints, whatever it is. It seems so many people now are having real difficulty handling commercial bread. All of these people were fine with this 48-hour long fermented bread that I was making. And it got to the stage where we just said to ourselves, well, this is too good to keep to ourselves. So we'll start up some bread classes, and that's what we did, and gave it our best shot. And gradually, bit by bit, yes, we were getting people that lots of gluten intolerant people. We probably had 1,000 people through our classes that are gluten intolerant. We've had nearly 100 fully registered celiacs now, but I'll come to that later. So we started making bread that's long fermented and stone ground flour. Basically, what you're talking about is real bread, or bread as it has been made for the last 5,000 years. And we started just doing more and more research. And to really sort of cover that in some sort of meaningful detail, I think we should just go back in history. And if I can pull up my share screen, I'm just learning to do this now. And I think you got a picture of some pyramids there and some hieroglyphic writing.
Yes, that's great.
Okay. So if we go back this 4,500 years, there was a little village next door, a town next to the pyramids where the workers lived. And there's so much bakery equipment that's been found as they've been excavating that little town called Armani, that academics presume that it's bread that's there is their staple diet, which means it was bread that was fueling hauling these 70-ton rocks up the pyramids. But academics like things in writing, and no papyri has survived. It's all been pillaged a long time ago. But about 8 years ago, they found a cave on the Red Sea. And these fellows were trading with Iran and Iraq. And rather than drag their boats across the desert all the time, they found a cave where they could hide all their gear, block it off and disguise it, and go back when they wanted to do some more sailing and get their gear out, and off they go. One day they didn't get back, and they found all their gear, including this time quite a lot of papyri. And this document that you can see on the screen was written by one of the foremen. And the black writing is what the workers did, how many meters of rubble or rocks they moved, etc. And the red writing was what they did for the workers. And that actual little bit of red writing there, you can see in the middle, is their 1 month's grain supply. So now the academics had a record of what they're eating. Yes, definitely bread. Bread is what's fueling the building of the pyramids. If you come forward now about 1,500 years to the Roman armies, the Romans had 4 armies as a general rule stationed around. One was always North Africa, one nearer Rome to protect it, one nearer Gaul, had to look after us troublesome Brits, and one over Asia, Iraq way. A Roman army's 20,000 men, and we got lots of documentation on them. One army consumes 60 tons of grain a day. 4 armies is 250,000 tons a day. And I always ask myself why they were in Egypt, all the Roman armies, were they all into Nefertitis or something like that? But the answer is, it didn't matter what empire you were in, the Greek Empire before the Romans, the Babylonian Empire, and even after the Romans in Constantinople, right up to 1500, grain has been the thing that was needed. And all these empires, it didn't matter which one you were in, Greeks, Babylonians, Romans. If you wanted an empire, you had to have an army. If you had an army, you had to feed them. And all the grain was grown in North Africa in those days. And you had to conquer North Africa first. All right, so we got 60 tons of wheat a day. What it boils down to, the point we're getting at is, of course, the pyramids are hauling these rocks up on bread. The Roman army is marching on bread. They're marching all day. They're building bridges all day. Sometimes they're fighting all day, but they're doing it on bread. Now, if we just go to our friendly neighborhood gladiators, someone gave us a book, someone read a book and told us about it, that these fellows were vegetarians. They did no dairy, no meat. They only ate bread made from wheat and barley. And he said that can't be right. So I did a bit more research and found out from a study from the Medical University in Vienna in Austria and the University of Bern in Switzerland, where they took their bones. They got hold of a gladiator's graveyard from Ephesus in Turkey, did all the spectrography and stuff, and found out, yes, it was bread. They didn't eat meat. They didn't eat dairy. So these guys are literally fighting for their lives every weekend or wherever, often the Colosseum, etc., was open, and they're doing it on bread. So you could march all day, you could fight for your life all day, you could build pyramids all day on bread. But when it comes to today, if we jump to our little friendly neighborhood laboratory rat, when I was really small, my accent is Australian and New Zealand mix, but I actually come from Guildford. I was down on my uncle's farm in Exeter, and I saw this documentary on the BBC. It was black and white, very speckly, but they were feeding these laboratory rats as much bread as they could eat, and they all died of malnutrition. I got really upset because I had pet mice and rabbits, and I was into animals. So we've gone from a point in time where you could march all day, fight all day, do all those sorts of things, but you could give as much bread as you like to a mouse or a rat in this day and age, and they would just die of malnutrition. So something has changed. There's no food value in modern bread. And the question then is, what are the issues? What things have changed? And the first big one was Pasteur discovered yeast. 1860s, commercially, it's sort of Fleischmann in America was the first person to bring commercial yeast on the scene. Sort of really, you're getting nearer to the 1900s when that came about. So up until this time, for thousands of years, all bread had been made with a sourdough starter. The only alternative was if you lived next door to a brewery, you could scrape some of the scum off the top of the beer and mix that in, but that was very rare, and not too many people lived next door to a brewery. So this starter had been used, and for the first time, commercial yeast came in. Yeast was there. It was floating in the air and between your toes and all sorts of places, but you couldn't buy it. You couldn't go out and get it. It was only discovered, really sort of widely, generally known, late 1800s, coming up to the 1900s. Bread industry sort of more or less said, thank you very much, and moved over to commercial yeast. I'll come back to the yeast in a minute and why it makes so much of a difference. That something else happened at exactly the same time. In 1886, at the Paris Exposition, the Hungarians rolled up with a roller mill, and all flour for thousands of years had been made with stone grinding. That was the only way you could make flour. The whole grain goes into a little hole between the stones turn round, whole grain flour comes out, and that's it. But there was no such thing as a flour industry, because wheat contains quite a lot of oil. And when you grind down the whole grain, the oil is in the flour and it will send it rancid. So it does not have an extended shelf life for commercial purposes. Everybody ground their own grain locally. And interestingly, I'll just divert for a second. This morning on the BBC News, there was this diagram of a new building they've excavated in Pompeii. And my two red arrows I put in there, one of them shows the 3 stone grinders they've got to make their own bread there. And there's even a little stable in their kitchen for the donkey to operate the stone grinder. But, you know, the bakery side of thing was a very big part of a house. Everybody had to make their own flour. And that's always been the case until this roller mill was invented and brought on stream in 1886. What they invented it for primarily was to be able to break a piece of wheat down into its individual component pieces. When you stone grind flour, it just is all absolutely mixed together, and there's no way you can separate anything out. But with a roller mill, they could fractionate the grain, and they could take out the germ where all the oil is intact. They could split off the outside bran layers, break them down into their individual layers, and sell them off to different industries. And then we're just left with the starch. And that is what white flour is. Prior to this machine being invented, there was no such thing as white flour. Never seen before, this Paris exposition. So once they could fractionate it, the outside layers of bran were sold off to different industries. Mostly in the old days, it was glues, wood glues, paper glues, wallpaper glue. Nowadays, it goes chicken and cattle feed. They're not silly. They want to put weight on their animals fast. So they get good stuff. The little germ, it's a baby wheat. It's a bit of a misleading term. It's a little baby wheat. He's got arms and legs and everything. He's got a leaf structure, a root structure. That is sold off to the pharmaceutical industry. And that's where all the vitamin E oil products come from. And we're just left from starch. So modern day bread is just made from starch, not made from wheat per se. Now, the goodies really are in the outside layers. They're loaded with what's called phytochemicals. And they're there to protect that little baby wheat. We're all under attack the whole time. If it's not cancers or viruses or even a prickle from a thorn, you can get some local inflammation. So your immune system has got to deal with that. And these phytochemicals from your diet are what help you get all the bits that you need. The outside layers, they've all got different chemical compounds in them. Just to give you an idea of what a phytochemical is, aspirin comes from the bark of a willow tree. That's a phytochemical. Industry goes in there, analyzes it, synthesizes it, and then manufactures it, sort of an artificial version. But it just so happens with all the phytochemicals that are in this wheat, they all work for us as well. And we just have so many documents now about the benefits. Whenever you hear of whole grains, if you Google what's a good diet for something or other, and it says whole grains, what it's referring to is not the fiber content. The fiber is really good for you, but it's not the fiber content that is causing you to lose weight, it just goes on and on and on, the benefits. I mean, I would just give it one little idea. A study by the Dutch government found that children on whole grain diets have 64% less asthma than other kids. A survey of 75,000 nurses in a couple of hospitals in America showed that if you're on a diet of whole grains, 38% reduction in breast cancer. And there are many, many, many benefits of having the whole grain with all the benefits of all the different components, rather than just white flour, which has got no real benefit, no use, no good for your body at all. It's starch, it's sugar, and all it's going to do is get you nice and big around your tummy. But these, okay, I'll go back now to the yeast. Why is there such a difference between commercial yeast and the original sourdough starter? And the answer to that, really, to give you a good idea, can be found in a cow's tummy. That's where the answers are. All the ruminants, sheep, goats, deer, gazelles, I think, if I'm right, even the fellows with the long necks, the giraffes, they're all got multi-chambered stomachs. Technically, they cannot handle eating grass or hay or leaves. It's got cellulose around it, and they can't break it down. So what happens is when a cow takes a mouthful of grass, it takes in zillions of microbiota. It goes down into the largest portion of the stomach, the rumen, and in there it ferments. And the microbiota go in, they're chomping and eating away. It builds up gas, same as if you're familiar with a sourdough starter, it's bubbly and gassy. And eventually they get to the stage where they go, ugh. And if you look at the word cud in an Oxford dictionary, it's a sound. It's not a little pat of cake of green grass. So these fellas bring up that meal from the rumen, chew it again, which is chewing the cud, swallow it a second time, and it goes down into the other portions of the stomach where now they can process it. So if it wasn't for this fermentation process, they would never get access to their nutrition. We wouldn't have domestic animals. We wouldn't be here. This is a system that goes just absolutely right back in time, long, like when were four-chambered stomachs invented? Long time ago. So the action of the microbiota in the sourdough starter go in and break down all the components in the wheat. The microbiota, they chomp it, they chew it, they regurgitate it, spit it out. Someone else comes and eats it. And when you leave some bread dough long enough, it looks like a sponge. It's completely fermented. And the microbiota have gone and broken it down and made it accessible to our digestion. And if it's not fermented for that amount of time, you're not going to be able to access the nutrition in it. So that gives us a bit of an idea of what a sourdough starter, that's only a little bit of a start of it. I'll come back to that in another moment. But that gives you an idea what the sourdough starter is up to. It's fermenting and breaking down the food components so that we can access the nutrition. And if it's not broken down, we can't access the nutrition, same as the cow can't get at their grass and stuff without that multi-chambered stomach. We don't have a multi-chambered stomach, but we do have a bowl that we can put the starter in and let it ferment in there and then make our bread with it. Now, what's the difference with the stone ground flour? If we go back to the roller mill, they can fractionate the grain, break it down to all its individual components, and they sell off the components to different industries. We get the white flour. But when the starch is put through the rollers, they pride themselves on how fine they can make it. And under a microscope, a particle of white flour is like a wafer. It's really, really thin. It's so thin that it dissolves in your system inside 30 seconds. And this is why a diabetic has a white sandwich, and within 15 minutes, it's completely gone, it's dissolved, it's broken down, it's throughout their body, and they're going to go off and have to get a shot of whatever it is diabetics have to have to counter the sugar. So the difference then is that's instantly soluble. And you have one white sandwich, it's broken down in a few minutes, and you go back for another one, you go back for another one, and now you're starting to get to the stage where you're eating far more than you need to eat, and it's only just starch in any case, which is not going to help you with your weight issues. What's the difference with the stone ground flour? Now, when the stone ground flour goes down between the stones, it's ripped and it's mangled and it's shredded and it's jagged and it's rough and it's discombobulated. It's whatever term you want to call it. But when you look at it under a microscope, it's very, very rough and jagged. And it takes 2 hours for your system to break it down. That's, you could see the difference for a diabetic. It's ultra slow release rather than instant 30 seconds dump of sugar in your system. So just that alone is a big advantage. But the stone ground flour Yes, it's got everything in it. It's got all the nutrition. Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. Because it's slow to break down, it also keeps you satisfied. It keeps you full. Two good slices of genuine long fermented stone ground flour bread just keeps you full for hours. That stops you snacking. That's just one little side benefit of how you can lose weight. You've got all the phytochemicals and you've got other things as well. So the stone ground flour is very slow release. It's got all the nutrition from the grain, and it's got the fiber in it. The fiber just sets up your digestive system to work at maximum efficiency. Let's go into some of the other things that the microbiota are doing inside the sourdough starter and inside the bread. We've dealt with a couple of them. Number one, they've pre-digested the bread. They've eaten their way through the dough, broken it all down so we can assimilate it. Secondly, going back to Mark, he said that the glyphosate modifies the gluten content. Well, actually, it's not gluten that's an issue. It's the gliadin protein within the gluten, and that's probably what the glyphosate is altering. It's increasing it or whatever. The microbiota break down the gliadin protein so that, in the words of not just one technical academic paper we've got, the one I mentioned earlier on, but we have a whole series of these papers, the gliadin protein is modified. So in the words of the technical papers, it is non-toxic to celiac disease patients. And that's what started me off down this road. Another one, wheat, all grains contain phytic acid. Phytic acid is an anti-nutrient. You can't absorb your minerals. You can't get iron and zinc and copper and manganese from Brussels sprouts or wherever it comes from when there is phytic acid present. And the caveman diet, the paleo diet people, they say that it's not natural for humans to eat bread because we only moved into towns about 5, 6, 8,000 years ago. Prior to that, however long you want to imagine mankind's been around for, they were hunter-gatherers. And it's only when we moved into towns that we started growing crops. So it's in the big picture of things. That was only yesterday. So they say it's not natural for us to eat bread, but their argument is commercial bread, modern bread. If you make bread the real way, the proper way that's been done for thousands of years, the microbiota break down the phytic acid and convert it to phytase. So now, not only can you absorb all your minerals, but it actually enhances your ability to do so. We had a dentist in one of our bread classes. He's a doctor as well, Oxford type doctor, not NHS doctor. He went away and did a paper, sent it to me and said, commercial bread, white bread with the phytic acid present is deadly on your tooth enamel, whereas sourdough bread made the traditional, conventional way is perfect for good dental oral hygiene. Coming back to the gliadin protein, we had another lady in our classes that asked us if this bread would be suitable for a Hashimoto syndrome diet, because Hashimoto syndrome diet, bread's totally off it and you can't have bread. And she just asked us, so I didn't even know what Hashimoto syndrome was, but I did some research. And it is an autoimmune disease where your body attacks your thyroid and can destroy it. And that gets pretty serious. What I did was, once I understood what it was, I went to Monash University in Melbourne, Australia, onto their website. They're the world's leaders on FODMAP diets, fermentable oligosaccharides and polyols. That's another story. Our bread is perfect for a low FODMAP diet on 4 counts, according to Monash University. But what they explained was Hashimoto syndrome comes about because your thyroid produces something so similar to gliadin protein that your body can't tell the difference. So if you have an issue with this gliadin protein and you're eating white bread and getting it into your system, your body thinks it came from your thyroid and goes off and attacks your thyroid. And that's why a Hashimoto's syndrome person or a lot of thyroid people are off bread. But as Monash University pointed out, the microbiota in the sourdough starter convert the gliadin protein to something else. So it is perfectly safe, and they recommend for this bread to be eaten by people on a Hashimoto's syndrome diet. We've got the amino acids are whacked up by the action of the microbiota. And another one is acrylamides. This is interesting because just recently, Rothamsted research out of Cambridge, they're the world's oldest field in food and crop research people, knowing that acrylamides are a problem when they're overheated. Now, this is your barbecues. If you're over enthusiastic on a barbecue and you get a little bit of black bits on your meat, you're not supposed to eat it because it can be carcinogenic. You should be fussy about the fish and chip shop you use, that they have a clean griddle and don't have lots of bits floating around in their oil vats, because when oils are overheated, so they say, they can become carcinogenic. But it's not the oil, it's just the acrylamides, one part of the oil that's the problem. The microbiota modify the acrylamides in the dough, in the bread, so that it is non-carcinogenic. But Rothamsted Research Institute, knowing that this acrylamide is an issue and can be carcinogenic, applies to toast. If you have toast with well toasted with brown, or even going a little bit further than brown on the outside, that's because then in that process, the acrylamides are overheated, they can become carcinogenic. So rather than make bread properly with a sourdough starter and fully fermented and let the microbiota do all the modifications, Rothamsted have developed now genetically modified wheat where the acrylamides are cut down in the wheat. So it just goes on and on and on. What we've found, we're working on gout at the moment. We're getting a pretty close link to sourdough bread being very beneficial for sufferers of gout as well. Bread's an interesting thing. Some people think it's quite difficult to make, or they're a little bit off-put. We've spent a long time getting really developing a simple way of making really, really good bread, good to eat, and good as far as being good for you. But whenever we have technical issues, people ask us questions about making bread. And I say, well, okay, when I have those sorts of questions, I'll just go back, say 1,000 years or 800 years ago and say, how did they handle that? They didn't have ovens. They didn't have scales. They didn't have temperature gauges or anything. You can cook bread. It really, when you understand it, it's a very, very simple thing to do. This picture here, we can make a really excellent loaf of bread on 7 candles. And I can make good bread on an ordinary hot plate or on a gas hob in a slow cooker, which only gets to 99 degrees, in a saucepan over 7 candles. We can make bread any way you like. And it's not just bread. We now, some things we need to understand. There was no such thing as raising agents before the Industrial Revolution, before late 1800s. As I said, everything was made on a sourdough starter. When I say everything, all cakes, pastas. In Pompeii, a few months ago, they found a new frieze, and there was a pizza in there. So pizzas, cakes, pasta, biscuits, we're making a really good equivalent of a Nairn's oat cake nowadays, just from a little bit of leftover starter and then put in some oat flour into it. But here is a chocolate beetroot cake just made from sourdough starter. But this cake is fully fermented. It's stone ground, it's whole grain. And this would be a cake you could just keep eating it and lose weight. We add no added sugar at all into our cakes. And so it's not just bread with this system that's been going for thousands of years. And here is our pasta meal. We make our sourdough stone ground flour pasta. And that, once again, both the cake and the pasta, because it's stone ground flour, it fills you up. It keeps you going for hours because of that, the nature of the slow release of the stone ground flour. All right, that's a bit of a rundown there. If I can get off my screen as I learn to do this, where is it?
Michael, show people your contact information because I'm
okay. I got
people want to contact
one there. The website is thegiftofbread.org. It's a .org, that one, and the email is thegiftofbread@gmail.com.
That's just
you've got to have the in it because there is a crowd in Australia called Gift of Bread, and they're a charity that gives out leftover bread from bakeries and things. But no, we're the Gift of Bread, and then you'd get straight on to us.
Absolutely fantastic. And I think you all can see why my initial encounter with Michael was 2 hours. And he does teach classes, and I've been to, I don't know, lost track of how many classes, just do it over and over again.
You've been to a lot.
A lot. It's such good news. You know, we need some good news these days. So rather quickly, I'm going to share my screen and just share a little bit to sort of introduce Stephanie. Let me get my thingy up. I think it shut itself down, so let me start it back up. Apologies about that. So I am Patricia. I'm the Health Revolution activist. I am with the Activation Company. Now let's see if my presentation is up now. There we go. And let me find you all again. There we go. And I will share my screen. And we are off. There we go. So as I said, I am Patricia with the Activation Company. And I'm just going to give a little intro about collagen before Dr. Seneff comes up. So when most of us think about collagen, we think skin, hair, and nails. And I know I did before I learned how vitally important collagen is. Let's see, I just need to get rid of a little thingy here so I can see all of my slides. There we go. But collagen is so much more. It is our scaffolding, our glue. Collagen is the primary building block of our body's skin and our muscles, our bones, tendons, ligaments, and other connective tissue. It's also found in our organs, blood vessels, and in our intestinal lining, which is skin as well. It plays a significant role in male and female libido. Who knew that? As important as collagen is, it starts to decline in our 30s. Low collagen is linked to many health issues, and we'll look at a few in a minute. But first, let's look at where collagen is and some of the important roles that it plays. So we see our skin is 75% collagen. And when you consider our skin is our largest organ, it's not just to keep our blood and guts in. It has many functions. So keeping it healthy and keeping our collagen levels up is very important. Our tendons and joint cartilage, I'll talk about that in just a second, but our tendons are 85% collagen. Our joint cartilage is 70% cartilage. collagen. And our bones, 90% collagen. I always thought our bones were made of calcium, but 90% collagen. Our eyes are 90% collagen. 80% of our brain is made of collagen. And I'll address that in just a minute. But when we consider that our body has 28 different types of collagen, let's look at just a few of them and areas of our body where collagen is necessary and which types are needed. So type 1 collagen is the most prevalent type that we have, and it is in most areas of our body. But look, it doesn't work on its own. Our corneas need type 1, 5, and 6. Our gums, I find this interesting, types 1, 3, and 5. So if you have wobbly teeth, you might need to up your collagen. Heart valve, types 1, 3, and 4. Our skeletal muscle, 1, 3, and 6. Tendons, 1, 3, and 5. Bones, 1, 3, and 5. Our cartilage, types 2, 9, and 11. And we have cartilage in so many areas. And our blood vessels, types 1, 3, and 4. Now, this article from The Guardian is pretty interesting. It says of the 20,000 proteins in our body, there is one that dominates them all. Without it, our cells would simply collapse in on themselves. It's quite astonishing. Our skeleton and blood vessels would disintegrate, and we would be little more than a blob of shapeless tissue. Nearly a third of the proteins in humans is composed of 28 different types of collagen. So it's not merely a building block. It plays an active role in distributing signals between cells and helping orchestrate movement of cells to repair damage in our body and our immune response as well. And then Age UK, which is a charity, according to them, they say falls are the #1 cause of death in the elderly. So falling in the over 75s results in bone fractures and head trauma. It's been estimated that treating hip fractures that have occurred through falls costs the NHS around £1 billion every year. So one of the reasons older people are so prone to falls is that the collagen that keeps our muscles and tendons supple in our youth is no longer being replenished, causing it to stiffen over the course of our lifetime. So as we get older, our joints become stiffer, and so we have a hard time maybe going up and down the stairs because our tendons are no longer pliable and absorbing shock. So with a natural decline in our collagen, as well as environmental toxins, which Dr. Seneff will address, that damage depletes our collagen. This is important to know so we know what to avoid as well as what we can do to protect our collagen production. So thinking about what contributes to make elderly people susceptible to falling, think about the way our feet and knees move when we walk. I saw a dissection of a foot, cadaver foot, many years ago, and it really made an impression on me. And it showed the tendons attached to the bone on one end and the muscles on the other, as you can see in this illustration. So if you look down at the toes and see where the tendons attach to that bone, and then follow that tendon up and see how it attaches to the muscle, you can see it quite well in the Achilles tendon in the left foot, which will be on the right foot for you. It's just astonishing how that bone then just sort of morphs into a tendon and morphs into the muscle. So as the foot is straightened, the tendons extend, as do the muscles. And then as the foot is, the other foot is retreating, and the muscles contract and pull the tendons to pull the foot up. So we pretty much do this without thinking. But try walking barefoot and watch how your feet respond. When we walk, our knees do a similar thing, but we don't think about it much. We grow to rely on knowing everything is working. We don't often think about walking until we can't. But imagine you're older and your joints are a bit stiff. You walk a bit slower. Your tendons are stiff and your muscles' reaction time has slowed down. You could trip over your own feet. And Britain, of course, is notorious for uneven paving stones, so that the slightest loose stone can catch the toe of your shoe and over you go, or catch the edge of a floor mat, or miss a step on a staircase, just because your collagen levels are low. And some other issues linked to low levels of collagen, of course, are wrinkles and sagging skin, which we're familiar with, but also joint pain. How many people do you know have joint pain and think they have arthritis when actually it's just low collagen levels? And muscle aches, fatigue, brittle hair and nails and bone. Diarrhea and gut issues can be linked to low levels of collagen. And menopausal issues. Think of just some of the symptoms of menopause, and how many of those might be linked to low collagen levels, instead of needing drugs for pain or any of the other, sleeplessness and fatigue. So many issues linked to menopause. We have a whole talk on that, but just think of the impact that just keeping your collagen levels up would have. Hair loss and hair issues. Our scalp is skin, and there are we've seen many results with restoring hair loss just by boosting the collagen. Lupus, low levels of collagen linked to lupus, lack of blood flow, osteoporosis and osteoarthritis. Again, low levels of collagen, not necessarily needing drugs and surgery, but just boost those collagen levels. The cancers as well. I was reading a study that showed the skin surrounding the prostate in men that had prostate cancer, if that tissue was low in collagen, their survival rate was not very good. Also, studies on low levels of collagen and breast cancer. And I was reading another more general study that suggests low levels of collagen enable cancer cells to proliferate. And then depression. Well, we saw the collagen levels in the brain, and we know that collagen levels in the gut are very important. And we know that the brain is connected to the gut by the vagus nerve, which is several nerves. So low levels of collagen there impact the communication between the gut and the brain. We know that 80% or 80 to 95% of our serotonin and dopamine is made in our gut. So if low levels of collagen, those productions can't happen, that communication can't happen, that can impact depression. So also vascular disease, hearing loss. That's an interesting one. So consider those teeny tiny little bones in our ears and our eustachian tubes. If they're low on collagen, could that impact hearing? I'm working with a lady now who's lost most of her hearing. Her doctors are not able to fit her with a hearing aid and get any results. But she shared with me that her doctor said that's because her eustachian tubes are flat. So we're considering, well, let's boost your collagen levels and let's see if the impact that might have. Slow injury recovery and slow muscle recovery. And we know that, you're probably familiar with collagen supplementation. You can supplement 5 types of collagen quite easily, readily available. But we can activate the gene in our cells that is responsible for our collagen production. And we can also downregulate the gene in our cells that unfortunately is responsible for slowing down our collagen production. We don't really need one of those, but it's there. But we can impact 10 types of collagen. And you can see again that the areas of where these types of collagen are essential and how they work together. So that is pretty much it from me. This is my contact details if you'd like to read the study on activating your collagen, like to know more about activating your collagen. And I'm going to turn over now to Dr. Stephanie Seneff, and she is she's going to talk to us about collagen and glyphosate, and something probably most of us not heard of, and that is deuterium. I'm really excited to hear more about that. So Dr. Seneff is an MIT professor and author of Toxic Legacy, which I held up earlier. Fascinating book. As well as being in book form, it is available on Audible. So you can listen to it. It is not an easy read, but it's a fascinating read. A lot of science. And Dr. Seneff is recognized by her peers as the world's foremost authority on glyphosate. So listen up. The more we know, the more we can do something about these issues. So we are very grateful to have Dr. Seneff with us this morning for her. She's coming to us from Hawaii, and she will address your questions at the end. So I will stop sharing. Where is my little thingy? Got to get down here and stop. There we go.
Hey there.
And get myself out of the way. So we're over to you, Dr. Seneff.
Okay, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I actually took it as an initiative to help me learn more about glyphosate and collagen. I found some very interesting new papers that I will be talking about for the first time today. So no one has seen these slides before. Many of these slides are new to me. And so I hope I'll be fluent in the way that I present them. It's hard stuff. It's really, really interesting. And I was quite excited about it. I want to say before I start, I really enjoyed Michael's talk. I love sourdough bread. It's the only bread that I eat. I'm lucky to be able to get a good source of organic sourdough here in Hawaii. And I also am aware of the degree to which glyphosate is causing the celiac disease and gluten intolerance epidemic. And he had mentioned, the wheat germ is probably the healthiest part of the wheat. It's also the part that grabs the glyphosate. When wheat is sprayed with glyphosate right before the harvest, it's not a GMO crop, but it's sprayed right before harvest. And the glyphosate goes into the seed before it goes to seed, and it dies, and it increases the yield because of it synchronizing the crop to go to seed all at the same time when it hits the glyphosate. And that seed, that the gluten, the healthiest part of the wheat is the part that has the most glyphosate, which is really, really unfortunate. I used to like to sprinkle wheat germ on my cereal, and you can't do that unless it's organic. So I want to do a real shout out to Michael and I was very interested in how the cows, I knew about this sort of separate stomach where the fermentation takes place in the cow. Very, very interesting. And also I want to say that glyphosate disrupts the microbes, particularly lactobacillus has many enzymes that help to break down the gliadin. And lactobacillus are very sensitive to glyphosate. So this causes the wheat not to be easily digested if you're being exposed to the glyphosate at the same time. And I think that's what causes these peptides to stick behind that then cause things like this Hashimoto's disease that he mentioned. So great talk, and I could resonate with a lot of what he said. So I will put up my slides now and we can get started. And let me... Okay, you see that? We're good? Okay, very so good. This is the title of my talk, Collagen, Glyphosate, and Deuterium. And this is showing collagen molecules over here. This is glyphosate, very colorfully presented. And this is hydrogen, this is deuterium. It's a heavy hydrogen, just to get you started on the deuterium, which is a very interesting topic to me. I've really focused on deuterium over the last couple of years, linking its toxicity to the effect of glyphosate on the system that manages deuterium. Really fascinating science. So first an introduction, then I'm going to talk about the glycocalyx, deuterium, and collagen. Deficient heparan sulfate in autism, sulfate plays an important role in maintaining the health of the collagen matrices. And then proline, the amino acid proline sequesters deuterium. This is a theory, but I think it's true. There's some evidence from the research literature. Defective collagen and disease, and finally a summary. So introduction, here's the big picture. Deuterium is a natural heavy isotope of hydrogen. It's present in blood at 5 times the concentration of calcium. So it has an interesting effect, and it is common in the body. Really, we should be considering deuterium and how the body uses it as part of the understanding of metabolism. The important thing about deuterium is that it's toxic to the ATPase pumps in the mitochondria that produce the energy in the form of ATP that fuels the cells throughout the body. And so this is crucial. And as a consequence of this, the body has developed really interesting mechanisms to keep deuterium out of the mitochondria. NAD is a very important molecule in metabolism. nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. And it's a major carrier of deuterium-depleted hydrogen on the H. The H in NADH has been sourced in such a way that it's going to be extremely unlikely to be D. And NADH is the molecule that delivers H to the mitochondrial intramembrane space to drive the HEPase pumps. So this is very, very important. Where this H comes from is very important. And the body makes sure that this H is going to be low in deuterium. Methylation pathways are another very interesting part of biology. And we know about defective methylation pathways in autism, for example. The methyl CH3 actually has low deuterium. Those three H's are all unlikely to be deuterium because of where that methyl comes from. And I should mention that this is very interesting because it actually comes from methane gas and acetate that are produced by the gut microbes using hydrogen gas as a reducing agent. And I hadn't planned on mentioning this, but I have talked about it in other talks. It's very important that the gut microbes actually, when they ferment, Michael mentioned all this gas that shows up when they ferment. There's hydrogen gas, which is used as a reducing agent to make methane gas. And that methane gas is going to have low deuterium because the hydrogen gas that's produced by the microbes is very low in deuterium. 80% of the deuterium is lost in the process of making the hydrogen gas. So that whole step of putting gas into the cycle that the microbes do is super important for producing deuterium depleted nutrients. And those short chain fatty acids that the microbes produce are going to be low in deuterium because they can be traced back to that hydrogen gas. Glyphosate suppresses many proteins involved in deuterium homeostasis, and that's a critical point. So deuterium is heavy hydrogen. It has an extra, here's the picture, hydrogen, 1 proton, 1 electron, the smallest atom. Deuterium has an extra neutron, which makes it twice as heavy. It's like carbon-14. It's a natural isotope of hydrogen. It's present in ocean water at 155 parts per million, 156, which doesn't sound like a lot, but as I said, that comes out as being 5 times as much as calcium in the blood. Our bodies are over 60% hydrogen among the atoms. 60% of our atoms in our body, over 60% are hydrogen atoms. So hydrogen is really important. And so even 155 parts per million turns out to be a lot of deuterium atoms. Interestingly, fats are low in deuterium, especially animal-based fats. Butter, for example, is one of the lowest deuterium nutrients you can find. So you can eat foods that are low in deuterium, and that really means a high-fat diet to reduce your deuterium burden in your body. So deuterium management in the body involves trapping deuterium in collagen matrices, and then invoking specialized enzymes that are able to choose hydrogen over deuterium for their reaction. So if there's a glucose molecule with a deuterium atom sitting there, it won't react. It'll just leave that one alone and pick another glucose molecule that has hydrogen for their reaction in order to fuel the mitochondria with hydrogen rather than deuterium. So glyphosate, the big picture, glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup, which is all over the food supply. It's considered to be safe for humans, but there's increasing doubt that that's true. It kills plants by suppressing the shikimate pathway, which is not found in human cells, and that's an argument that's used for why it's safe. However, our gut microbes, many of them have the shikimate pathway, and many of them use that pathway to synthesize essential amino acids for the host. And these microbes outnumber our own cells by a factor of 10. So clearly that is a very important role of glyphosate in causing toxicity by disrupting those microbes, making our amino acids, critical amino acids, deficient in the host. Glyphosate is an amino acid analog of the coding amino acid glycine. My research suggests it is getting inserted into certain proteins by mistake in place of glycine, and that is very disruptive. And that's crucial for collagen because collagen has many, many glycine molecules, glycine residues that can be substituted by glyphosate. So there are strong correlations between the rise in glyphosate usage in the United States and the rise in multiple neurological, oncological, autoimmune, and metabolic diseases. And this paper by Nancy Swanson from 2014 has a large number of figures showing perfect correlations between the rise in glyphosate and the rise in many chronic diseases. This is my book, Toxic Legacy. You already saw it, released by Chelsea Green in 2021. It presents extensive data on glyphosate toxicity, both animals and humans. And it shows how glyphosate interferes with sulfate homeostasis. And this turns out to be also very important for collagen, for the collagen matrices. And my book argues that glyphosate is insidiously, cumulatively toxic through its diabolical insertion into proteins by mistake in place of the coding amino acid glycine. This unique feature, which is unique to glyphosate, I don't know of any other chemical that works that way, that explains why it could be causing so many diseases. So this is a slide I used to try to explain this idea of glyphosate substituting. Glyphosate is a glycine molecule with an extra material stuck onto its nitrogen atom. It's an amino acid analog of glycine. So when you're assembling from the DNA code, you get a code for glycine. GGC is a code for glycine. So this enzyme is looking for a glycine molecule, and it finds this one, but it's actually glyphosate. This is the glycine part, but it's got this extra stuff over here that it can ignore. So it matches the code, and it inserts it's building this protein and inserts the glyphosate into the protein, and makes a huge mistake when it does that, because glyphosate has very different biophysical and biochemical properties compared to glycine. Multiple species of bacteria and multiple species of weeds have developed resistance to glyphosate by swapping out a crucial glycine residue in the enzyme EPSP synthase in the shikimate pathway, replacing it with alanine. So when that becomes mutated to a code for alanine, glyphosate becomes completely unable to suppress this protein. The protein becomes completely insensitive to glyphosate with that change, which I think is a huge hint that that's what's happening. The glyphosate is actually going into the protein by mistake. So the next section, the glycocalyx, deuterium, and collagen. So here's the big picture. Here's a cell, and you see all this stuff out here. This is the endothelial glycocalyx that surrounds the cell. And this is true for all the cells, including the endothelial cells that line the blood vessels. So there's a glycocalyx. This is endothelial, actually, glycocalyx. So this is an endothelial cell lining the blood vessels, but it surrounds all the cells as well, not just the endothelial cells. And so this endothelial glycocalyx generates electricity to supply the cells. And this is Jerry Pollack's work, which is extremely interesting. And I've read a lot of his materials, both articles and books. So my hypothesis is that the glycocalyx traps deuterium, and it extrudes deuterium-depleted protons into the blood. So Jerry showed that the glycocalyx produces gelled water, and the gelled water produces a battery, and the protons are pushed out. But he hasn't linked it to low deuterium protons. That's my part, because I think that the protons that are pushed out are unlikely to be deuterons, because deuterons tend to want to stay in the gel phase rather than going out as being released. They're more likely to stick in the gel than the protons are. So protons gather at the interface between this exclusion zone water, which is the gelled water surrounding the cell, and the bulk water, which is in the blood, the flowing blood, creating a battery. Sulfate is crucial for maintaining the gelled water. There's lots and lots of sulfates attaching to this glycocalyx, and they induce the gelling of the water, which becomes very, very important. So most cells in the body maintain an extracellular matrix, which is formed from proteins with complex amino sugar chains attached to them. This is called the sulfated glycosaminoglycans. Sulfate anions bind to the sugars at strategic locations in an irregular but non-random pattern. And collagen is the most abundant protein in the extracellular matrix. So the glycocalyx that lines the walls of the blood vessels is formed from these amino sugar protein complexes. And I suspect that one of the important roles that they serve is to trap deuterium and release depleted protons into the blood, so that the water in the blood has a lot less deuterium than it would have if that glycocalyx wasn't there. This is from Gerald Pollack's work, one of his papers in 2017. And he does these experiments using these synthetic sulfite-containing molecules called naphion. He uses those to create this situation that's a lot like what is going on in the blood. But you can picture this being a blood vessel. Over here is the cell, the endothelial cell, and over here is the flowing blood. And this is the gelled water in the glycocalyx here. In his case, it's his synthetic form of the blood vessel. And he showed experimentally that the protons get pumped out. All these pluses are protons being pumped out. And it creates a battery at this boundary between the gel and the fluid, the flowing blood. So I think deuterium helps to maintain the EZ water. It helps to keep it gelled, and that it stays with the gel so that it decreases the amount of deuterium in the flowing blood by virtue of trapping deuterium. So here's a schematic of the extracellular matrix. This part over here is the cell. This is structures, cytoskeleton of the cell. This is the bilipid membrane of the cell. And then this is the glycocalyx out here. These proteoglycans are these sulfated sugar chains, very complex and connected up with the collagen. The yellow is the collagen, and this purple is the fibronectin, which is another very important protein in the extracellular matrix. So it regulates cell migration, development, proliferation, shape, tissue homeostasis, and wound healing. And fibronectin and collagen are the two major proteins in the extracellular matrix. and they are responsible for structural support and cell adhesion. And so if fibronectin isn't there, you have a critical defect in fibronectin, it's embryonically lethal. That's how important it is for the body. Its absence prevents the formation of a collagen network. And then fibronectin binds to collagen and protects it from degradation. So these are the two important proteins, most important proteins in the glycocalyx, fibronectin and collagen. So this is a really interesting paper that I actually found when doing this most recent research. I was really glad to see this paper because it shows some of the direct effects that glyphosate has on the gut in these mice. So it's called perinatal exposure to low doses of glyphosate-based herbicide combined with a high-fat diet in adulthood causes changes in the jejunums of mice. And that's part of the digestive system. So these mice were exposed to glyphosate, and they showed there was a decrease in fibrillar collagen, and in particular in type 1 collagen in the gut, and an increase in type 3 collagen. Type 1 collagen is the most important one. And thank you, Patricia, for your introduction. That was excellent. Type 3 collagen is usually associated with wound healing, and it's not nearly as strong as type 1 collagen. So to have a strong matrix, you need to have type 1 collagen, which is reduced in the presence of glyphosate. So when they were also fed a high-fat diet, they had a significant decrease in the crypt depths and the villi heights of these villi that are in the lining the gut. And this is a characteristic feature of celiac disease, is to have this compression. These things get really wrecked in celiac disease. So this effect may be due to the negative regulation of collagen-1 biosynthesis, resulting in, and they use the term tissue sagging, which I think is, you could say that could be happening everywhere in the body. And we see a lot of issues of tissue sagging in today, especially as you get older. So here's a paper on increases in type 3 collagen. That's the one that glyphosate increases expression and protein synthesis in patients with inguinal hernias. And this is a very common defect in the abdomen that often in men that requires an operation to fix it. And it occurs because of a weakening of the muscles in the lower abdomen. And that weakening could be due to glyphosate messing up the collagen. So they said a constitutive and systematic increase in type 3 collagen synthesis may result in reduced collagen fibril assembly in the abdominal wall, eventually leading to the development of herniation. So this is, again, linking to the type 3 increase, which, as I said, is associated with wound healing. So you sort of think there's some kind of wounding going on from the glyphosate. So I wanted to take a detour here into heparan sulfate. That's been a very interesting topic for me for many years. I identified heparan sulfate deficiency in association with autism early on in my research on autism. So collagen and fibronectin are the core molecules in the extracellular matrix, and fibronectin depends critically on heparan sulfate for its proper formation. And so heparan sulfate is lining throughout the glycocalyx. That's one of those complex sugar chains that hook up to the collagen to help us support the gelling of the water. Heparan sulfate deficiency is a strong feature of autism. Is it due to glyphosate's impairment of sulfation pathways? That's what I suspect, because glyphosate has a lot of problems. Experiments have shown a lot of problems with the enzymes that are involved in sulfation pathways when species are exposed to glyphosate. Fibronectin plays a crucial role in neurodevelopment involving neurite outgrowth, which is impaired in autism. And my hypothesis is that glyphosate suppresses heparan sulfate synthesis and disrupts collagen triple helix structure due to its substitution for glycine and collagen. So two critical effects that can cause these problems due to glyphosate. So this was a paper, interesting paper. Heparan sulfate is necessary for the early formation of nascent fibronectin and collagen-1 fibrils at matrix assembly sites. So this is this collagen-1. It depends upon heparan sulfate. So it could be reduced by glyphosate because of glyphosate's impairment of the supply of heparan sulfate. This is induction of endothelial tube morphogenesis. The development of the blood vessels by type 1 collagen may depend upon its triple helical and fibrillary conformations and on the N-terminal heparin binding sites identified here. Heparin is the most highly sulfated molecule in biology, and it's a very close relative of heparan sulfate. So when it binds heparin, it also binds heparan sulfate. Fibronectin supports neurite outgrowth and axonal regeneration of adult brain neurons in vitro. That's the title of this talk, this paper. Very interesting because, of course, neurite outgrowth is defective in autism. So I really perked up when I saw this. And this said, we demonstrate that cultured cortical and hippocampal neurons from adult mice showed robust neurite and axonal outgrowth on fibronectin, which is associated with the expression of markers associated with axonal regeneration. So they're both repairing the axons and the neurites, developing, improving the structure of the brain as a consequence of having that fibronectin. And so this is a paper that talks about the impaired features of autism that are related to neurite outgrowth and axonal production. So this would suggest again that the heparan sulfate deficiency is what's causing the problem in autism. And this, of course, is a paper that looked at autism brains post-mortem. And they found that the brain tissue was defective in heparan sulfate. In the subventricular zone of the lateral ventricles. Those ventricles are in the middle of the brain. They hold water. That's the cerebrospinal fluid is inside those ventricles. And that's the place where neurons develop during development in utero. So very important to have adequate amounts of heparan sulfate inside those lateral ventricles to promote a proper development of the brain. And so they said it may be a deficiency in heparan sulfate in that area. It could be a biomarker for autism and potentially involved in the etiology of the disorder. This is a direct quote from this paper, aberrant extracellular matrix glycosaminoglycan function. And so new neurons develop from stem cells in that zone through the action of fractones composed of heparan sulfate proteoglycan. So this just shows heparan sulfate is so important for the development of the baby's brain from this article here. And here's a paper showing, this is very interesting. This one was particularly intriguing for me. And I read this many years ago. It was published in 2012. It showed that mice, these were healthy mice when they were born, but they added a toxin to their brain that resulted in an inability to make heparan sulfate in the brain ventricles, exactly where the problem lies with the autistic kids. And when they did that, these mice exhibited all the classic features of mouse autism, both cognitive and social. And there's another paper here that talks about these BTBR mice. These mice these are mice that have been bred to breed true to autism. So they use these mice to study autism in mice. And they showed that this paper showed that they had deficient heparan sulfate in those fractones, which then and these mice are a strong model of autism. They have this problem. So this is another experiment here, published also in 2012. So both of these papers worked together to really convince me that this heparan sulfate deficiency in the brain is a key feature of autism, and it can be due to the disruption of those sulfation pathways by glyphosate. So my next topic is proline sequesters deuterium, and here's the big picture. And Patricia mentioned this, nearly 1/3 of the proteins in the human body are collagen molecules. I did not realize that 80% of the brain is made up of collagen. That is really, truly remarkable. So it forms the glue that holds the body together. It's highly enriched in proline and hydroxyproline. And so proline has special properties that allow collagen to trap and sequester deuterium. And there's an enzyme that I'm very fascinated with called peptidoprolyl isomerase, PPIAs. And I'll have a little more to say about that in a moment. It's a crucial class of enzymes that orchestrate, they facilitate the folding of collagen in the endoplasmic reticulum before it's released out into the extracellular space. And I suspect that it plays a critical role in trapping deuterium in those proline residues in the protein. And proline also plays a major role in cancer cell metabolism, which I think I can explain through the deuterium issues. So this was an amazing thesis from 1943. I was really delighted to find this. And it showed that proline is able to trap deuterium and hold on to it, hold very tight onto deuterium and not let go. So most of the time, deuterium kind of wanders around. It comes off, it goes into the water, goes over to another molecule. It's constantly moving around in the body. But when proline gets deuterium attached to it, it doesn't let go. So this was a 17 atom percent deuterium was put into the proline. They did this in the chemistry lab. They had this incredibly deuterium enriched proline, and then they attacked it with boiled it and added 20% hydrochloric acid and did that for 72 hours. They expected that to cause the hydrogen atoms in the water to replace the deuterium atoms in the protein and reduce this 17 atom percent down by a lot. But in fact, it only reduced it by a small amount, down to, where does it say? I guess it was down to 16.2%, but I don't know where I see that. So even under these relatively drastic conditions, exchange, if there is any, was very slow. So nearly all of those deuterium atoms stayed on the proline residue when it was treated with this aggressive form. So my hypothesis is that collagen folding in the endoplasmic reticulum involves trapping deuterium in proline molecules and ultimately sequestering it into the extracellular matrix and the bone. And then this reduces the deuterium loading in other proteins. And I think this is very important because this goes on during protein folding. Many collagen molecules are being folded in the ER at the same time as other molecules are being folded. The collagen is sort of sucking up all of the deuterium so that the remaining proteins will be reduced in deuterium. So this is this enzyme PPIase that I mentioned earlier. Proline is the only amino acid that has this interesting feature that it has both a cis and trans formation, that it can flip back and forth between cis and trans. And this enzyme causes that flipping to happen 1,000-fold higher than it would happen without the enzyme. And so this goes on in the ER when the protein is trying to fold. Collagen has to fold into a beautiful triple helix structure, and it needs this constant moving around to be able to figure out how to fold into that structure. And this enzyme is crucial for it to be able to do that. And so it functions as a protein folding chaperone. It's the rate limiting step during collagen triple helix formation, this isomerization process. And so I think what it's doing is stirring up the water. Basically, the proline molecules are flipping back and forth, which is causing the entire protein to flip, to move around, almost like using a spoon to stir up the water. And it allows the deuterium atoms to gain access to the proline. And when they get in there, they stay. Every time one gets in, it stays. And so eventually it's accumulating, it's scooping up all the deuteriums out of the water to help the other proteins to have less. So I think this is extremely interesting. This is all theoretical. I haven't seen this written about anywhere, this kind of concept of what that's doing, but I suspect it might be true. This was a great paper on seals, and it showed that seals accumulate deuterium in their bone. And of course, the bone is almost all collagen, like 90% collagen. The seals trap deuterium in their bones, in the collagen molecules in their bones. And this paper says that, in fact, other molecules that contain proline and hydroxyproline also trap high levels of deuterium. And it's interesting that proline and hydroxyproline are very common in collagen and other extracellular proteins, but much less common in the enzymes that operate inside the cells. So they're concentrated with proline, I suspect, because proline can trap deuterium, and you want to pull the deuterium out into the extracellular space far away from the mitochondria. And so this particular paper shows that this is the amount of seawater right here, and much, much higher, up to twice as much in the bone of these seals. It makes the bone very strong, and it helps them to be able to handle the deep water dives where the pressure becomes very high. And then usually when you look inside cells, you find less deuterium than what is in seawater. And the full spectrum in nature goes up to 800 parts per million and down to 800 times as much. I guess this is a factor of 800. There's a measure that they use here relative to the point here that goes from a range of -900 to +800 on the scale. So 310 is twice as much. So I guess 800 is like 6 times as much as in seawater. It can be concentrated up to 6 times as much in nature. But the particular interest is this collagen, which has these very high levels of deuterium in the bone. So now I want to talk a little bit about cancer. I'm quite fascinated by proline in cancer because proline plays an important role in cancer. And cancer cells actually are constantly breaking down their extracellular matrix and then building it up again. They're very active with their extracellular matrix. And they do that in part to grab proline, and they can use proline in place of succinate for the important enzyme that actually delivers the protons to the ATPase pumps. And so succinate is often defective in cancer cells, and succinate deficiency is a risk factor for cancer. So, but the cancer cells can use proline instead for the same reaction that's loading up these quinones with these 2 hydrogens that are going to be low in deuterium because of this process and coming from NADPH. This H is going to be low in deuterium. It gets delivered to the proline, and then it gets delivered here to the FAD. This is the ubiquinol that is very important in metabolism that ends up in the membrane and then eventually gets delivered to those ATPase pumps. These hydrogens that came from here, which are low deuterium hydrogens, loading up in the proline and taking them off and going back and forth through this cycle. Over here, we get glutamate. This GSA it comes from glutamate, and glutamate can be converted into proline back and forth. And this is what happens in the cancer cell. So this is a picture of a cancer cell. proline metabolism in a cancer cell. It looks a little bit complicated, but this is the collagen here. So it has every third amino acid of collagen is glycine. This is collagen. The other ones here are proline. And the proline is the collagen is broken down, the proline is released, and then it's fed into the mitochondria. And it can also make proline over here from glutamate, and it can go back and forth between glutamate and proline. Every time it does that, it's dumping protons into the TCA side. It's dumping protons into the intermembrane space to generate ATP using the ATPase pumps. And over here is also a way to produce proline. So the cancer cells are busy making proline every which way they can. Some of that proline goes off over here, but what doesn't go off is going to be enriched in deuterium, because only the ones that don't have deuterium are going to react here. This guy is an enzyme that can not use the deuterium version of proline. So this concentrates deuterium and proline, putting it back in the matrix, making that collagen matrix stronger, because there's more deuterium in the proline. This is what I suspect the cancer cell is trying to do, is to build a deuterium-rich collagen matrix in order to trap deuterium. So the cycle from proline to glutamate and back supplies high-quality hydrogen to the mitochondria and leaves behind high deuterium proline, which is put back into the matrix, enriching the deuterium there, ultimately making the matrix stronger. So defective collagen and disease. Here's the big picture. Collagen's triple helix structure gives it strength and elasticity. Collagen has long sequences of GXY, GXY. It has incredibly enriched in glycine compared to other proteins. They're susceptible to glyphosate substitution. And the G is critical for making that triple helix structure. Surfactant proteins in the lungs have a collagen-like stalk that could be disrupted by glyphosate for the same reason, because it has a lot of glycine. And that might explain the strange lung disease that's linked to vaping. Multiple glycine mutations in collagen lead to genetic diseases like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and osteogenesis imperfecta. Is glyphosate causal in the epidemic we are seeing today in joint pain, pelvic prolapse, and bone fractures? So there's a lot of stuff in this section. Here's a piece of a collagen matrix, which is this this is proline, hypoproline, hydroxyproline, glycine, proline, hydroxyproline. That pattern is very common in collagen. And it has this beautiful triple helix structure, which gives it its properties of able to hold water and its tensile strength and its flexibility. Very important for the structure of the molecule. Here's my schematic adding of a glyphosate molecule here. This is the glycine part. This is the part that's added to the glyphosate. It can fit inside here and mess things up, because glycine being small is what allows it to form this triple helix. If there's something else here that's not glycine, there's going to be extra stuff that's going to block the ability to form the helix, and it's going to cause a lot of structural problems with the collagen. So I was really fascinated by this vaping lung disease, and I connected it to COVID-19. So e-cigarettes, people who vape, there's a weird lung injury problem that's showing up called EVALI, use-associated lung injury. And it has a lot of symptoms that are really very, very similar to the symptoms of COVID-19, particularly this upper respiratory symptoms. Sneezing and congestion are not there. So COVID-19 has this kind of dry cough property without a lot of congestion. And it's the same thing that goes on with this particular lung disease, which researchers are trying to understand, but so far have not been able to figure it out. And so these symptoms are remarkably similar to the symptoms of COVID-19. So I looked into e-cigarettes, and it turns out glycerol is the base. They work on the principle of burning glycerol and propylene glycol, which is derived from glycerol. In the product. And glycerol is the major byproduct of the biodiesel fuel production industry. It's very cheap. So the market is glutted because it's showing up as a byproduct, and we're really boosting biofuel production these days. There's a lot of glycerol. It's cheap, so it's convenient to use it as a base for these e-cigarettes. And there was an experiment where people were asked to smoke e-cigarettes that didn't contain the nicotine. They only contained the glycerol and the propylene glycol. And that showed they had increased inflammation. So they were suspecting the inflammation might be due to those other substances, not due to the nicotine. And they also, people who smoke e-cigarettes have a 5-fold increased risk to COVID-19. Does someone have a question? Okay,
No,
oh, go ahead.
No, I'm going to mute myself. I'm sorry, that was just shocking, but.
Oh, okay. So a lung surfactant protein, there's a lung surfactant protein called SPD, surfactant protein D, that has collagen-like stalks, GXY, GXY, GXY. And that's actually a member of a class of proteins. Many different proteins that are produced by immune cells, as well as by the lungs, are important for trapping viruses. And so this paper talks about this, this SPD might block the interaction of the microbe with its receptors, aggregate the microbes, or it may act as an opsonin, enhancing the endocytic uptake of the microbe in the host. So this is a paper talking about this SPD being a very important protein for trapping viruses in the lungs. It's produced in the lungs and it traps the viruses and makes it easy for the immune cells to clear those viruses. So if it's defective, that's going to be a problem. This is a sequence in SPD that has, you can see every third amino acid is glycine, GGG. Every one of these starts off with a glycine, and it has this collagen-like structure in that stalk, which is part of the important way in which it's able to do its job. So those SPA and SPD were both shown to be reduced in these mice that were exposed to glyphosate, and they're members of a class of proteins produced by immune cells called colectins. They play a powerful role in trapping viruses and other pathogens. And then they all contain this classic collagen-like region that forms their stalk. So I'm suspecting that glyphosate is messing up those surfactant proteins in the lungs and causing, for those vaping patients, but also possibly in the cities, glyphosate could be released from those biofuels that are built from glyphosate-exposed crops, and people in the cities breathing that glyphosate could be susceptible to increased risk to COVID because of these defect in these surfactant proteins. So joint hypermobility syndrome is a relatively common genetic condition that often involves mutations in glycines and actually in the glycine residues, not just mutations in collagen, but mutations in glycine in collagen. And these are they include connective tissue fragility, joint hypermobility shown here, delayed wound healing, thin stretchy skin, abnormal scarring, vascular fragility, and risk of aortic aneurysm. All these features can show up as a consequence of mutation in the glycine residue in collagen. And so the diseases that are associated with this include Marfan syndrome, osteogenesis imperfecta, and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And this paper talks about a particular single mutation in one glycine residue that caused severe disease. So it's caused by impaired folding of the collagen molecule, leading to collagen deficiency. So I wonder about the opioid drug epidemic in the context of all of this, because many people are having problems. You know, they've had knee surgery and hip replacement surgery, back pain. Lots and lots of people, especially as they get older, have severe back pain. And of course, opioid drugs have become a very big problem in this country, killing people with overdoses. And the US and Canada are 2 to 3 times higher. The rate of these opioid prescribing opioids to people for pain is 2 to 3 times higher in Canada and the United States than it is in most European countries. And Canada and the United States are very big on glyphosate. They consume a lot more glyphosate. They use a lot more glyphosate per person than other countries. Back pain is a leading cause of activity limitation and work disability worldwide. And more than half of the regular opioid users report back pain. So it's a very common reason why people would be taking opioid drugs. And then addiction and overdose related mortality have risen in parallel with prescription rates. So my suspicion is that glyphosate is causing the back pain because of the messing up of the collagen in the backbone and in the supporting tissues, causing the back to not be able to hold itself up properly. So this is pelvic prolapse, which is another condition that I've been somewhat fascinated with. It's when the pelvic organs kind of collapse down into the bottom of the body. And there's other disorders like varicose veins and joint hypermobility that are also linked to that, which are associated with changes in collagen strength and metabolism. So it's caused by weakened pelvic supportive tissue, which of course could be a switching from type 1 to type 3 collagen. Collagen maintains supportive functions of the pelvic floor, and it becomes loose, disorderly, and discontinuous. Biomechanical changes can destroy the supportive function of the pelvic floor. So each year, pelvic floor dysfunction affects between 300,000 and 400,000 American women so severely that they require surgery. So this is, again, the collagen 1, collagen 3, and prolapse. So this paper talks about an increase in collagen 3 and 5 is associated with a decrease in mechanical strength. And again, because collagen 1 is a very strong form of collagen. And it's due to a decrease in the fiber size. So it's generally agreed that a higher 1-to-3 ratio in tissues is indicative of greater strength, whereas a lower ratio may result in tissue laxity. And this is what you'll see with that paper that I showed you on the mice being exposed to glyphosate. That's exactly what happened, more 3, less 1. an increase in collagen 3 in combination with an increase in active MMP9, matrix metalloproteinase, which breaks down the matrix, is typical of tissue that is remodeling after injury. So again, it suggests that glyphosate is essentially causing injury. And I would say it's doing that by virtue of substituting for those glycine residues. The increased flexibility, dispensability, and decreased tensile strength associated with an increase in collagen 3, together with a decrease in elastin levels, will very likely contribute to the progression of pelvic organ prolapse. So this paper really lines up very well with my idea that glyphosate could be causing this pelvic prolapse by virtue of redistributing the collagen towards 3 rather than 1. So in summary, deuterium homeostasis is an overlooked process in biological organisms that keeps mitochondria healthy by supplying them with depleted protons. It's likely that the extracellular matrix lining the blood vessels and surrounding the cells plays a crucial role in trapping deuterium. Heparin sulfate, collagen, and fibronectin are essential components of the extracellular matrix. And evidence supports the idea that glyphosate disrupts heparin sulfate synthesis and collagen folding, leading to impaired deuterium homeostasis and defective collagen matrices. Severe heparin sulfate deficiency in the brain ventricles is a core feature of autism. Glyphosate may be causal in many medical conditions such as cancer, autism, back pain, pelvic prolapse, hernias, and vaping lung disease due to the arguments that I presented here. And so we're done.
Well, I think I have about 1 million questions. Does anyone else have questions before I get started? I'll keep my up to about 3.
No, I think everyone's still in shock. That was extremely interesting.
Thank you.
We're still processing it.
Guys,
I'm sure we might get some. Sorry, Mark.
Sorry, guys, I need to dive off. I've got another interview to do at 9 o'clock. So
okay, no,
I hope that's okay. Thank you, everybody. I've learned so much tonight. I think my head's going to explode.
Thanks,
you.
Fascinating.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, fascinating listening to you too.
Have a great evening, guys.
Thanks, Mark.
Well, so one question I have is, does glycine have to be present in a protein for glyphosate to get inside, or can glyphosate use other proteins? So is it just the GXY that makes glycine vulnerable?
Not just the GXY, but the G, just the G. Anytime there's a glycine, there's potential for glyphosate to substitute for it, but it's the only amino acid that glyphosate will substitute for. That's why when you mutate it to alanine, glyphosate can't touch that protein. So that's how the weeds get around glyphosate, by substituting, by changing their protein so it no longer has the glycine, and then they are protected against the glyphosate.
It's just mind-blowing. You mentioned that deuterium breaks down ATP in our mitochondria, causing energy loss, as well as creates more reactive oxygen species or oxidative stress.
Yes, yeah. So what happens is these ATPase pumps, actually the way the ATP works, the whole synthesis of ATP works in the mitochondria is quite fascinating, because the mitochondria pump lots of protons into their intermembrane space. They have this membrane around this matrix. And so in the matrix are these enzymes that are pumping protons into the intermembrane space. And those protons, so there becomes a battery actually. There's more proteins around the outside of the matrix than there are inside the matrix. So the proteins want to come out just because to equilibrate. And those pumps are waiting there for the protons to come rushing through the pumps to come out. And that's basically a proton motive force that actually drives the motor of the pump. And then those protons get trapped. When they come out, they hit oxygen. The whole system is set up to supply them with oxygen at that moment. And that oxygen, it combines with those proteins to make water. And that's called metabolic water. And it's deuterium depleted water because all those protons don't have deuterium. It's been so carefully designed to not put deuterium into that intermembrane space. It's really fascinating what they do. I am convinced that that is a crucial part of metabolism that is being missed by most of the people. It's the people in Russia, Hungary, and Ukraine. That's where the research is happening. That's where it started with the whole idea of deuterium. They discovered it because these people living up north in Siberia were really healthy, despite having kind of what didn't look like a very good diet, because they were up north. They had a short growing season. They ate a lot of animal-based foods, but they drank water that was deuterium depleted because it came off of the glacier. And the water that comes off the glacier is depleted in deuterium. And they finally concluded that that was the reason why they were so healthy. They lived a long time, that, you know, many of them over 100 before they died, and they had a really healthy life. I think the deuterium is really, really causing trouble and causing a huge list of diseases that is a consequence of glyphosate disrupting the ability to do what the cells do so well, to keep that deuterium trapped in that extracellular matrix, and then to be careful to deliver it. And as I mentioned, the gut microbes play an important role too. And I didn't talk about that here, but I have talked about that in other talks, where the gut microbes make hydrogen gas and use that hydrogen gas to make methane. And that methane eventually becomes methyl units, and the methyls are passed all around the body and carefully guarded. And they end up attaching to the DNA, the methylated DNA, and that controls the whole expression of the proteins. But those methyls are chewed off of the DNA, and those protons are very valuable because they're low in deuterium. So when cancer cells actually take the methyls off of their DNA and push those hydrogens into their matrix in order to fix their deuterium problem, I think that a high deuterium is a key driver of cancer. And I've talked about that in other talks as well. It's really, really fascinating. I just gave a 1.5-hour presentation at The Real Truth About Health yesterday, where I talked about really totally about glyphosate and deuterium. I didn't include many of the talks that you guys saw, because that's another, I added new material for you. So they didn't see this, but they saw this, the whole story of the microbes and how they help the body. They supply the body with deuterium depleted nutrients.
Well, I registered for that, so I hope to get the recording of that one, but I get you live tonight. So, so is deuterium likely to be in our drinking water?
Oh, it is. Deuterium is everywhere. You can't avoid it. It's a natural element. It's everywhere. And it would be normally in your drinking water at 150, I forget, 156 parts per million in seawater, for example. So all the water has deuterium, but there's different amounts depending upon the source. And in fact, there was a fascinating paper that I didn't show you, but it was, they looked at depression, and they saw that, and they looked at depression in the 50 states of the United States, and they correlated it with the amount of deuterium in the drinking water. So it turns out that if you're in the South, especially at the equator, the water typically has more deuterium, because when the rain comes to build, you know, the water in the lakes comes from the rain comes down in a hot place, and the water evaporates on the way down. And the water that leaves the raindrop is likely to be depleted in deuterium, and therefore the raindrop ends up with more deuterium by the time it gets to the ground. So the waters at the equator have more, and it's a range from, like, you know, 130. Typical waters in the United States are from 130 parts per million to 155 parts per million. But even with that small difference, the places that have 130 have much less depression than the places that have 155. Really amazing to me that, in fact, I drink deuterium depleted water. This is light water here. Well, I drink a glass of it every day.
I'm going to get, that was my next question. I've got the report from my water company here, which I haven't looked at yet, but I'll look for deuterium. If it's not listed, then that'll be another phone call to them.
They won't list it because it's natural. You would expect it to be there. And in fact, people wouldn't even, like, for example, the mRNA vaccines, I have wondered whether they're deuterium enriched, because I found companies that were talking about how you could make RNA more sturdy by enriching it in deuterium. And they wouldn't have to list it if it was enriched. So it could be the mRNA vaccines have extra deuterium, but it's possible, you know, it's not, I can't prove it. I just know that there are companies that are suggesting that that would be a good thing to do, to make RNA sturdier, which is what they wanted to do with the vaccines. But they could do that and never report it. They wouldn't have to report it, because deuterium is a natural element. Of course it's in there, but it didn't happen to say that, oh, we've got a lot more in there than you normally would have. They don't have to say that, you know.
Well, fluoride's natural too, but they're wanting to add more fluoride in.
Yeah, Hawaii is the only state in the country that didn't buy into fluoride. So I'm very happy to say that my water is fluoride free, or at least not added.
We're supposed to be free of fluoride here, but so how do you filter? What water do you drink? How do you filter it out?
No, I don't actually do anything fancy. I have good water here. Actually, the company has tested our water for deuterium, for glyphosate, and there was none. So our water we have a very good source of water from the mountains, and I trust it to be safe. Although I do use the filter in the refrigerator, but that's it. But yes, I think if you live in near the agricultural fields, you're going to need for sure to run your water through a filter. Probably reverse osmosis would be the best, and then you'd have to put the minerals back in. So that's complicated. I don't do that because I have really I live in a place where the water is really good.
I was in Scotland last week and the water's brilliant, but now I'm back down here. So anyway, I'm monopolizing. I don't know if I should ask this question. It's quite long and I might just end up confusing myself, but so cancer cells demand glutamate.
Yeah, they take in a lot of glutamine, actually. Glutamine is glutamate it has a nitrogen. Glutamate and glutamine are cousins. They're slightly different. And cancer cells take in the glutamine and then they take the nitrogen off, and they can use that for important. They have to make lots of nucleotides and they need that nitrogen. They get the glutamate, and then the glutamate actually is really important to the cancer cells. And it plays a role in lots of things. It helps to make the nucleotides. They have to make all these nucleotides in order to copy their DNA, because they're trying to grow. They're always trying to multiply and make more cells. They're driven to do that. That's their big job. And so they take in lots of glutamine, but they also use the glutamate to make the proline that then fuels the mitochondria, because they often end up with a defective version of succinate dehydrogenase, because it gets wrecked by the reactive oxygen that's happening because of the deuterium. So that's kind of a complicated story, but the deuterium causes the reactive oxygen, which damages the DNA, which can cause defects in succinate dehydrogenase, which is a critical enzyme that actually feeds those protons into the intramembrane space. So when that protein's not working, then you can use a proline instead of succinate as a supply of those protons. And then you end up with proline left behind that's rich in deuterium, which you put back into the matrix and make it stronger, make better gel, be able to trap deuterium better. So I think that's a nice system to basically titrate the deuterium on the proline molecules to pull the ones out that are low, leaving behind the enriched ones, put them back into the matrix and make that strong. Cancer cells are constantly remodeling their extracellular matrix.
Yes, and that just I couldn't explain it like that, certainly, but I'm trying to figure out how to explain it to people who want to understand it, but that we'd have to have your life and your education and your experience to understand that. I'm thinking of with glutamate, glycine, and cysteine making glutathione.
Yes, right.
You addressed low levels of glutathione in your previous talk with us. Then
yes, I have talked a lot about that, and I think it's a crucial aspect of autism, low glutathione in the brain, and glyphosate's causing that. Glyphosate has been shown in many studies to deplete glutathione, for example, in the liver, and that makes sense as the glycine. So glycine could be substituted by glyphosate to produce a broken version of glutathione. And then the cysteine, which is the sulfur pathways that are messed up by glyphosate. So glutathione has a hard time existing in the context of glyphosate exposure.
Well, then collagen too. So low levels of glycine in collagen as well, which is the main amino acid. So it's like a vicious.
It's not so much low levels, but if you think of the collagen matrix with all these glycines, and then here and there it's a bullet where glyphosate has substituted, and then the matrix can't form that beautiful crystal structure that it needs to work properly. So the collagen molecule is sick. I suspect in some cases it never makes it out the door. Like it builds this collagen, it's got a bunch of glyphosate in it. It marks it for deletion. It says this collagen's no good. I got to make it again. And then it takes it apart and builds it back again, hoping to do better next time. I suspect that goes on a lot. When you have a molecule that big with so many glycines, there's a huge likelihood that glyphosate is going to substitute somewhere. And in some critical places, it can totally wreck it. So it doesn't work properly and it'll get recycled. And it's interesting that glyphosate actually increases the synthesis of proteins involved in both protein disassembly and protein assembly. The proteins that do those jobs go up in the presence of glyphosate. That's because the proteins are not being correctly made. Because of those mistakes where the glyphosate goes in and messes things up, they get rejected and they have to be made again. So I think that's a crucial issue that affects all the proteins that are,
Would then regulating the COL1A1 gene that makes collagen help if glyphosate is trying to destroy it so much?
You'll have to ask that again. I was distracted by that phone call. Sorry, can you try again?
So then if glyphosate's trying to hijack the molecules to deplete our collagen, would regulating or boosting the COL1A1 collagen gene be.
I think that would be a good idea if you could do that. Certainly to take collagen that's rich in COL1A, that would be good as a compensation for the lack of it because of the glyphosate, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Compensation was the word I was trying to think of. Thank you for that.
Yeah, organic. Make sure it's organic.
Absolutely.
Anthony Samsel actually has tested. He tested collagen. He tested gelatin. He tested a bone of a cow, a CAFO cow, a cow that was didn't have a good life. It was, in a confined animal feeding operation cow. He got the bone from the butcher, and all of those tested positive for glyphosate and fairly high levels. He even got a horse's hoof. The horse had died of founder, and he took the horse's hoof and tested it for glyphosate, and also found high amounts of glyphosate in the hoof. The horse's hoof has lots and lots of collagen, like a bone, right? It has probably 90% collagen.
Well, a lot of bone broth, unless it says organic, is made from
exactly
the rubbish. You
have to be very careful. Bone broth is a super healthy food, but it needs to be organic. Grass-fed beef, for example, would be good.
Before I ask my last question, do we have any other questions?
No, we don't.
Well, I asked this.
But sorry, before you say that, we have lots of thanks for you and great information and how people have found it very fascinating and thinking about their own illnesses, etc. So, and they'll be buying your book so they can learn more.
Great.
Saying that they need to listen to the recording again. So I
covered a lot of material.
I asked this question of you before on the last episode we had you on, the last time we had you on, but I'm going to ask it again because I'm still hearing healthcare professionals advising their clients to wash their produce in vinegar to get rid of the pesticides.
I have heard that too. It's not going to get rid of the glyphosate because it's embedded in the tissues. It's in the proteins.
Okay.
So
I just wanted to hear that again from you, and people will probably have a new audience watching tonight or listening to the recording. And I think that's a very important message to get out, and hearing it from you, I think really drives it home. We need to do something about our food.
Yes, and in fact, when you wash, I think when you wash the vegetables, you are probably washing off some of the fungicides and insecticides that are used on the crops as well. But the glyphosate won't get washed off.
Well, I want to thank you again.
Thank you for doing this. It's been great. I enjoyed hearing about Michael's talk on the wheat. Very interesting.
Yes, well, I hitched my wagon to his star a few years ago, and I've learned so much, and so we learn as much as we can, and we share it with those that we can, and we enlarge our circles and our areas of influence. And thank you so much for all you do, and hopefully next time we get you and Zach Bush on together.
That'd be fun. That would be good.
Have you made any progress there?
No, I haven't been able to get any response from him. It's kind of frustrating. I've tried, but I even tried to invite him to come to Kauai and give a talk, but he seems to be, maybe he's not paying attention to email. I don't know, but he's not responding. So
I can't get past his people. So
he's probably just very, very busy.
I'm sure he is indeed. Well, thank you again very much. And we'll stay in touch. We have some other things planned. I think we want to do something on climate change, and you've done
I'd love to do that. Actually, I could do a talk on climate change for glyphosate. I'd love to do that. I don't have a talk on climate. I have a few things here and there, but I could put together a good talk on climate change for sure.
Perfect. Well, you measured the air over the airport, so we'll be in touch on that.
Yeah, we sure will, because that's something that we're really looking at the PFFA at the minute. So that would be really great. So, well, everybody, what a fantastic evening. You will get the recording. Lots of you have been asking. You will get the recording, and you will be able to go over this information again so that you can take it in and really think about what it is that all of our speakers have been talking about, and so you can really start to absorb that rather than the glyphosate. So thank you ever so much, everybody. It's been a fantastic evening. Thank you, Stephanie, for tuning in all the way from Hawaii. We're not jealous at all. Thank you, Michael. And when I send out the recording, it will have everybody's details on it as well, including a link to Stephanie's book, etc., and the links to Michael and his wonderful flower. So thank you very much, everybody. It's been fantastic, and we will look forward to seeing you again next time. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great.
Good night, everybody.